to Scoring Opportunity, a Bundesliga Fantasy Manager podcast. I'm your host, Fred, aka FBL Notbremse, and this is episode 3. We're at the end of the last international break of the year, and boy, am I excited for 6 uninterrupted match days of Bundesliga Fantasy Manager action. Today, we're going to keep it short and sweet and answer some really good listener questions pertaining to this transfer window. You can find the show's Twitter page under @scoringop_pod, where I post 2 calls per week for listener questions. All questions will be answered, either on air or in the comments. Let's dive right in. Now let's get to your listener questions. First up, we got a few from Piotr QG, who asks, Angelino versus Benzabaini. He also asks, who is the best goalkeeper for the next fixtures? As well as, who is the best mid-range forward pick? Mecha, Modeste, Onisiwo, or Burkhardt? Hey Piotr, thanks for the questions. To your first one, from a price point, I would say Benzabaini. It looks like he's gaining in form, but so far he hasn't brought too much to the table fantasy points-wise, except a good amount of one-dual points. Angelino isn't the same player he was last year, at least fantasy points-wise. Don't know if it's him or the system under new coach Jesse March, but Angelino definitely does not justify his price tag. Per the heat map on SofaScore, Angelino is getting further up the pitch, but Benzabaini is taking more shots per game. Long story short, I'd say Benzabaini because you'd save some money you can put elsewhere. If Benzabaini falls flat in the next game weeks, you could then look to move on to a player like Gvardiol, Mbabu, or Sosa. Your second question was, who is the best goalkeeper for the next fixtures? And I would either go for Flecken or Riemann, who are number 1 and number 3 on the top scoring goalkeepers list. With Riemann, you'd save 1.9 million ducats, and Bochum look pretty solid in the back, so they may even get some clean sheet bonuses in the near future, likelier against teams like Augsburg or Bielefeld. Flecken has been fantastic this season, and Freiburg also like to keep a clean sheet. For other goalkeeper options, or if you want to go with 2 playing goalies, I recommend you take a look at the nifty goalie chart that @officialdnl put together for the next 6 match days. The chart shows you all goalkeepers under 7.5 million ducats and how many times they play at different times. You can find the chart on officialdnl's Twitter page. Again, the handle is @officialdnl. Piotr's last question was regarding mid-price striker options. He mentioned Mecha, Modeste, Burkhardt, and Onisiwo, and these guys are all great picks. Modeste, Burkhardt, and Onisiwo are out-and-out strikers. Mecha is now playing as more of a winger since the return of Weghorst, but it's still looking dangerous as he looks to continue his goal-scoring run. If I were to rank them, and this is based partly on stats, partly on fixtures, and partly on price, I would say Modeste, Burkhardt, Onisiwo, Nemecha. But there's not a lot of air between those picks. Onisiwo is an outlier in the sense that he's only scored 1 goal so far this season, but has taken more shots than his teammate Burkhardt and provided said teammate with passes to shots and assists. You can also swap any of these players out for one another depending on fixtures. Here are a few questions from Matt Wojo, who asks, thoughts on the best way to allocate your budget between positions during this transfer window? And where are you spending for heavy hitters? Hey Matt, thanks for your questions. Last season, we had an easier time allocating our budget. You could just get in Lewandowski, Haaland, and Silva up front, then go with Angelino and Sosa and Davies in the back, and in midfield you could go with a mix of Endo, Grifo, Baumgartner, Stindl, Reina, and Amiri. Those were the days. This season proves to be more difficult in getting the right balance, especially with injuries to Haaland and Schick up front. Plus, there aren't any good budget midfielders save for Freiburg's Jung. My advice would be to go big in midfield and look to get in those mid-range or budget options in back or in your forward line. A midfield of, for instance, Nkunku, Wirtz, Hofmann, Kimmich, and Kostic is doable for most budgets because you can go with a budget defense without sacrificing points by getting in Gieselman and Scally. We already went over 4 good mid-price striker options, but I'd also like to add Awoniyi and Höhler to the mix. As for other heavy hitters, we don't really need to spend too much on them because of the slew of good mid-priced and budget picks available. Besides the 5 midfielders just mentioned, I would also suggest Goretzka, Szoboszlai, Grifo, or Bellingham, maybe even Brandt as premium options for your midfield. Defender premiums are few and far between though. Really there's only Davies, Günther, and Guerrero, with Sosa and Upamecano as fringe options. Up front you have Lewandowski as a must-have, and Haaland whenever he returns. I would have suggested Schick as a Haaland replacement, but of course he's injured too. You then have Kramaric, Müller, Sané, and Royce as heavy hitters up front. Our last listener question comes from Ignatius Brian LK, who asks, what do you think is the limit on differentials we should have, and how many template picks do we need? Hey Ignatius, great question. This really plays to the heart of the game. If you find yourself needing or wanting to climb rank, you will have to get in more differentials. But if you want to maintain rank, you would need to go mostly for template picks. Of course, it's a lot easier to climb rank when you're lower down the ladder than higher up. Specifically, I'd recommend going with 3 to 4 differentials, maybe 5, which should be from the Friday evening or Saturday afternoon matches. That way, you can always sub them out later with your higher own template picks in the Saturday evening or Sunday matches. Don't go down the rabbit hole of trying to pick too many differentials, because the risk is that you may lose rank if things go south on a particular match day. I would also suggest to create a simple Excel sheet and plan out your team for the next match days. This way you have a better overview of the upcoming matches and which fixtures involve your players. I'll have a link in the description to an article I wrote for Fantasy Tipsters where I go into more detail on this very subject. Hey, that's our show for this week. Remember to get your team in by 2025 Central European Standard Time on Friday evening. Thanks so much for tuning in again. Next week we'll be back with the regular format, including a game week review, a look at my team, the halftime segment, and your listener questions. Until then, have a great match day.